let's move to a team that does not have to think about adding a quarterback because they have the reigning MVP. They also have the scariest backfield in the history of football with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And of course, we were talking about the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, Derrick Henry, the huge move they made this offseason. Sully, what else does this team need to do to stay atop their perch in the AFC North?
You talk about, the greatest, 1-2 rushing punch in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. I'll ask you this, though. Who's blocking for him? Like, what does this offensive line look like? And I'm not just talking about, okay, they need to add a tackle here or a guard here. They kind of need to reconstruct their entire offensive line. They trade away Morgan Moses. You have Ronnie Stanley entering a contract year. Both of your starting guards from last year have since left. There's a lot of reshaping that needs to be going on here with Baltimore's offensive line. And that's one of those things where, again, it's not the Stephon Diggs blockbuster taking over headlines, but it's something that we're going to be talking about come November if Baltimore is not able to live up to what they were able to do last year. Derrick Henry's averaging less than 4 yards a carry, and Lamar Jackson's running for his life every week. Like, they need to figure out their offensive line. That's, to me, is the number one priority on a multitude of levels.
Yeah, and it kind of blows my mind. I follow a couple Ravens people on Twitter, and they talk about it, but I feel like maybe this isn't getting enough national talk that the Ravens, yes, they have Lamar Jackson. Yes, they have Derrick Henry, but they're blowing up their offensive line. As you mentioned, 3 starters from last year gone. John Simpson, Kevin Zeitler. You mentioned the trade to trading away Morgan Moses. And so you're almost starting from scratch. You're the defending AFC champions. You have a target on your back. Everybody's coming for you, and it's great that you have Derrick Henry, but if you don't have anybody to block for him, having Derrick Henry doesn't really help you. I mean, I guess it helps you no matter what because he's Derrick Henry, but it helps you less when you're dealing with that. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Baltimore does at 30th overall because the chances are there's not going to be a top 5 offensive lineman left on the board for you. So do you reach and take one of the lower guys, or do you go to another position in need? Maybe you get some pass rushing help. They didn't lose huge names. So, Jadeveon Clowney's gone. Tyus Bowser's gone. We don't know what Kyle Van Noy is going to do. So maybe you need a little bit of help there, but it does feel like offensive line is the big issue.
Yeah, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma seems to be almost a resounding player in these mock drafts that we're seeing from Wilson and others on our site.
All right, let's move from Baltimore to the team that used to be Baltimore before they moved to Baltimore, the Cleveland Browns. All right, well, let's see what they do. They signed Jameis Winston. That was exciting. They traded for Jerry Jeudy. That was exciting. It's been kind of an exciting offseason. Sully, this team, pretty good last year. They managed to get to the playoffs, won 11 games. What do they need to do to get better for 2024?
Great defense. We'll see what happens at quarterback, but they helped them obviously getting Jerry Jeudy. I think that running back is kind of a big need here. Obviously, you have Nick Chubb, but we're not talking about the Nick Chubb that we all know and love. We're talking about a Nick Chubb that's coming back from another devastating knee injury. You have Jerome Ford. To me, it just feels like you could have used one of the, we saw a lot of running backs go early in free agency, and I'm not saying go out and sign Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry or something like that, but you should try to, land on your feet here to give yourself some insurance. And I think you could probably do that at the NFL draft, maybe a high day 2 pick or something along those lines. I don't have their draft capital in front of me, but to me, that would make a lot of sense if all of a sudden they're somewhere in day 2, bringing aboard a running back that they can feel confident that can maybe carry the load along with Jerome Ford while Nick Chubb's getting back up to speed.
Yeah, I think injuries, I'm pretty sure the Browns, we talked about how the Ravens are losing 3 of their 5 starting offensive linemen from last season. If everyone's healthy, I believe the Browns have all 11 week 1 starters back, which is just crazy to think about when there's so much turnover in the NFL. And really, to your point, kind of at running back and what I'm going to say at tackle, is that it feels like what they need is insurance for people who were injured. They had Jedrick Wills, who missed a good chunk of last season. They're starting left tackle. Obviously, Nick Chubb missing a good chunk of the season with his injury. And so you don't know how those guys are going to look in their return. So it feels like insurance to kind of fill those spots. And at running back, I know the Browns made a couple moves and they didn't hit any home runs. I think they signed Dante Foreman and Nyheim Hines, maybe Hines becomes your return guy and not really so much in that running back role, but not enough that you should feel comfortable about what they're doing. But this team doesn't have a lot of holes, do they?
No, it seems like again, it's all going to come down to Deshaun Watson. I mean, that's really what this is now at this point. He has the big contract. They have a great defense. They brought him another weapon. Yeah, sure. Could they use another running back? Yes. We're kind of clipping at the edges here of what this team needs. They don't really need that much. What they need is Deshaun Watson to be a capable quarterback, and if he is, this team is going to be really, really dangerous. It's just that I have my doubts of it actually coming to fruition with him specifically.
All right, let's move on to a team that has had one of the wildest offseasons. I feel like the Steelers usually play it pretty quiet during the offseason. They make a couple moves, and you're like, oh, that will get them to 9-8. That will get Tomlin over the hump this year, like he does every year. And now they go out, they get Russell Wilson, they trade for Justin Fields. You throw in Van Jefferson. They signed Cordero Patterson like 3 hours after the new kickoff rule was passed. They brought in Patrick Queen, which is just a really good signing. It feels like one, especially in Tomlin's defense. So what does this team have left to do?
I agree with you. I think that they've kind of just gone crazy. Like, you're like, oh, wow, okay, this is going to be a totally different Steelers team than we saw a year ago, obviously, with all the moves they made at quarterback. I would maybe like to see them add another wide receiver. Again, we're talking about this being a deep tackle and wide receiver class. I think you can kind of go both of those positions. But to me, you get rid of Deontay Johnson. You're going to elevate George Pickens. You bring in Van Jefferson. But I don't know if Van Jefferson really does much for me in terms of like, okay, you're going to be able to be our second wide receiver, maybe quote unquote third wide receiver if you want to count Pat Freiermuth as that number 2 pass catching option. But to me, if you could get like I'm just trying to find names that relatively could be in their range. Like, I don't know if LSU's Brian Thomas Jr. falls to you at that spot. Like, that would be really fun to see what that looks like in that offense. That I think is something that I would look at, because Russell Wilson is not the quarterback that he used to be. He needs help. He needs, the DK Metcalfs and Tyler Lockett's and the Jerry Judys and the Cortland Suttons. He needs people to kind of carry him. And if it's not him, you still need all of that with Justin Fields. He needs pass catching help as well. So to me, I think it's wide receiver. That to me would be the most enticing thing, particularly in round 1 if someone falls.
Man, maybe the Steelers should have traded for Stephon Diggs, huh?
Sure, why not?
They've been going totally crazy.
You see, can you imagine George Pickens and Stephon Diggs on the sideline together when Russell Wilson is throwing it to who knows who in
Freiermuth 3 yards downfield?
That 100% should have happened. We would create a red zone version of just looking at them on the sidelines.
At all times.
An octobox of those guys.
That would be hilarious. I think the other thing, the Steelers, they just cut their center, Mason Cole, a couple weeks ago. So that is kind of a question mark to me. Maybe you look for some center help. This is kind of the draft where you could get that help. There are a couple top tier centers that I feel like will definitely be available when the Steelers pick at 20th overall. So maybe you draft a center, maybe you draft a wide receiver, but they don't have a lot of big holes. Maybe you add another corner, and obviously they traded for Dante Jackson in the Deontay Johnson deal, but that's Steelers admitting, hey, we needed some secondary help. And so you hope Dante Jackson works out. All right, Solly, let's get to the final team on our list. Since this is my team, I will tell you what I think their problems are, and then you can talk me off the ledge, because I have a lot here. I have a whole list of things that I'm worried about with the Bengals. And really what they could do with their first round draft pick. Defensive tackle. They lost DJ Reader. They haven't really brought in anyone that replaces him. He was their run stuffing guy. They were horrible at stuffing they run. They gave up more yardage than any other team in the AFC last season. Couldn't stop the run, couldn't stop the pass, couldn't do anything. Tight end. I feel like they could use some help at tight end. Not as big, because they did sign Mike Gesicki, so I'm not sure that becomes the biggest need at 18th overall when they're on the board. Wide receiver. Who do you have behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? And also T. Higgins looking more and more like he's going to leave after the upcoming season, so you could use receiving help, a little bit of cornerback help, and then obviously I'll let you go with the last one, but what's the offensive one? What's the big one they need on offense?
To me, it's offensive tackle, because as somebody who has watched Trent Brown over the last few years, you're rolling the dice, man. That is a very, when it hits and when he is motivated and is paid accordingly and is ready to go, he is a beast. He's phenomenal. If he feels like he has a chance to win, he's going to get paid and all of that, he is going to be a very sturdy tackle for you. And I think that you will get that for this season if everybody stays healthy, Joe Burrow and all of those guys. I will say this, though. I wouldn't necessarily hand him a bag. I don't know if I would be, I don't know if this is a guy that I would say, hey, okay, great. You had a good season for us a year ago. Here's a blah, 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 X amount of year deal for X amount of money. Don't think that would make sense. So I think tackle, again, in a deep tackle draft, that might be something to be proactive about, because you just don't know what you're going to get out of that spot. But I do agree with you, pass catcher, just because you don't know what's going to happen with T. Higgins and all of that, whether that's Brock Bowers or Brian Thomas Jr., who I mentioned with the Steelers, but could make just as much sense in Cincinnati, former LSU guy, like that would, that could work. Those are the positions that I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, the tackle one to me is interesting because, like you said, they added Trent Brown. He's going to be motivated because he only has a 1-year contract, which maybe that's what you have to do with him. Just keep giving him 1-year contract. And I had to do the Bengals mock draft. It came out on Wednesday, I believe. And someone asked me why I didn't have an offensive tackle going to them. And the Bengals have been like the most unpredictable team in the draft for the past couple years. After Burrow got rushed by Aaron Donald at the end of Super Bowl 56, everyone was saying they have to take a tackle in the 2022 draft, which, was a few months later. You know what they didn't do, Sully? They did not use their first round pick on a tackle. They didn't use any of their picks on a tackle. They didn't take any offensive linemen in 2022. So then we get to 2023 and everybody's saying, you know what the Bengals need to do with their first round pick? They need to take an offensive tackle. You know what the Bengals did in 2023? They didn't take an offensive tackle with their first round pick. They didn't even take an offensive lineman in 2023. They took a guard in 2022, but no tackles. So we've gone 2 straight years with no tackles. This team just seems like we're going to keep building defense and try and plug our holes in free agency. So I think if we don't see one of the top 3 tackles in the draft fall to them 18, that they'll probably go with the defensive lineman. But if one of those guys do fall, then I think they will be more than happy to take one of the top guys on their draft board, whether that's Amarius Mims, J.C. Latham, I think would probably be the 2 best fits